So hello, this is Anti-Relativity lesson 1A and it's entitled Don't Question How. So it's a continuation from what happened in lesson 1. I'm pointing out what is taught in special relativity lessons does not make sense. And I'm taking an example book on relativity which was updated. And this is the book. It's Introduction to Special Relativity by Wolfgang Rindler, and the first edition was in 1982, then had a second edition in 1991. So I'm comparing the changes made. So I'm basically going with the second edition of the book and pointing out when it's different to the first edition. And the last thing I pointed out in lesson 1 is the book says the following: light propagates in all inertial frames and thus also in a laboratory, speeding through space just as it would in still ether. It is not for us to ask how! Exclamation mark. So I want to look at the last comment there, being it is not for us to ask how! Exclamation mark. This comment was not in the original first edition, it was added to the second edition. And what I imagine is students were asking him how was it possible all that he just said, and his answer to that question is don't ask that question. So it's an indication that what he'd been telling them was all nonsense. A person might think it is only that book saying such a thing, but it is not. Others teaching relativity often say similar. Taking another example, so from this site, the University of New South Wales, Australia, teaching relativity. And in that site, it eventually gets to say, this is quote, at this stage, many of my students say things like the invariance of the speed of light among observers is impossible, or I can't understand it. Well, it's not impossible. So first of all, he's pointing out that the students don't understand what is being taught to them. And the response the students get is just being told to believe what is taught to them because it is what experiments show. Quote, this is what he says, it's even more than possible. It is true. This is something that has been extensively measured, and many refinements to the Michelson and Morley experiment and complementary experiments have confirmed this invariance to very high precision. As to understanding it, there isn't really much to understand. However surprising and weird it may be, it is the case. It's true in our universe. The fact of the invariance of C may require some accepting, but it doesn't take much understanding. What requires understanding are its consequences and how it can be integrated into what we already know. But the theory is not making sense, just means that the experiments that support the theory don't make sense as well. So students are just asked to believe things that don't make sense. That ends today's lesson on anti-relativity. I'm pointing out, if you think relativity does not make sense, well, what is taught is that you're supposed to believe it regardless. And next lesson, I'm back to dissecting Rindler's book on relativity in more detail. But the conclusion here is, you're, as a student being taught relativity, you are told to believe nonsense. regardless of whether you can understand that or not. Finish thank you at the end of this short video.